The story begins with showing Mitsuhashi lost in thought, feeling a deep emptiness due to his mundane life. Seeking a change, Mitsuhashi decides to transfer to a new school with the ambitious plan of becoming a delinquent there. His mother, noticing his unkempt appearance, insists that he gets a haircut before his first day at the new school. Reluctantly, Mitsuhashi heads to a barbershop, where he encounters a man named Ito who invites him inside. But Mitsuhashi, feeling uneasy, chooses to go to a different barber instead. To his surprise, the barber at the new shop turns out to be none other than Genji, a legendary delinquent known for his fearsome reputation in the movie Crow Zero. Genji, once the top fighter in the delinquent world, has seemingly left that life behind and now works as a barber. At that moment, Mitsuhashi is both shocked and intrigued by this unexpected encounter. After the haircut, Mitsuhashi emerges with a bold blonde hairstyle, ready to embrace his new identity as a delinquent at his new school. The next day, at Nyo High School, Mitsuhashi is introduced to his classmates by Mr. Mukinoki, a teacher with a somewhat comical demeanor. Mr. Mukinoki mentions that there is another transfer student who will be arriving late. Hearing this, Mitsuhashi feels a pang of disappointment. He thinks arriving late on the first day would have made him look cooler and more like a delinquent. Moments later, the late transfer student arrives, and to Mitsuhashi's shock, it's Ito, the same person he met at the barbershop. Fearful that Ito might reveal his recent haircut, Mitsuhashi impulsively challenges him to a fight, hoping to prove his toughness to the class. Mr. Mukinoki, too intimidated to intervene, watches helplessly as the two square off. Shortly after, in the teacher's lounge, Mr. Mukinoki tries to save face by boasting to his colleagues about how he scolded the new transfer student for having blonde hair, though, in reality, he did no such thing. Meanwhile, back in class, Mitsuhashi is confronted by a group of school delinquents who take issue with his flashy hairstyle. They drag him to the school rooftop, intending to teach him a lesson. Terrified, Mitsuhashi tries to talk his way out of the situation, claiming he's from America and that's why his hair is blonde. But his excuses only anger the delinquents further. Just as things seem hopeless, Ito arrives and scolds the bullies, declaring that picking on the weak is a cowardly act. Mitsuhashi, offended at being called weak, turns his anger toward Ito, and the two end up arguing. The delinquents, feeling ignored, grow furious and decide to attack both of them. What follows is an epic brawl, 2 against 10. Despite fighting with their eyes closed, for reasons unknown, Mitsuhashi and Ito somehow manage to defeat their opponents. In fact, Ito doesn't even realize the fight is over until Mitsuhashi points it out. After their unexpected victory, Mitsuhashi and Ito are convinced of their strength and potential as delinquents. They decide to team up and become friends, vowing to rule the school together. From that day on, the students of Neo High, including the former bullies, begin to respect Mitsuhashi and Ito. The delinquents even pledge their loyalty to the duo, cementing their status as the new leaders of the school. During lunch break, Mitsuhashi is approached by one of the delinquents he had beaten up the day before. The delinquent name is Sagawa, and from now on, Sagawa declares that Mitsuhashi will be his boss. Sagawa also informs Mitsuhashi that a girl from Shireen High School is waiting outside to meet him. However, when Sagawa mentions that the girl isn't particularly attractive, Mitsuhashi decides to send Ito to meet her instead. As a result, Ito heads outside to talk to the girl. Thanks to their newfound reputation for easily defeating 10 delinquents, the girl asks Ito for help in dealing with bullies from another school. However, Ito refuses her request. Shortly after, 2 of the girl's friends arrive, Kyoko and Akemi. The moment Ito lays eyes on Kyoko, he falls head over heels in love. Out of nowhere, Mitsuhashi appears and invites the 2 girls to a cafe to discuss their problem. At the cafe, Kyoko and Akemi explain their situation, and Mitsuhashi agrees to help, but on one condition. After everything is resolved, he gets to touch Kyoko's breasts. With no other choice, Kyoko reluctantly agrees. Mitsuhashi and Ito then head to Shireen High School, disguising themselves as women. Along the way, Mitsuhashi teases Ito, saying he looks cute and suits the feminine disguise. Meanwhile, outside Shireen High, a group of delinquents is waiting to ambush Kyoko. Soon after, Mitsuhashi and Ito approach them, flirting with the bullies to catch them off guard. When the delinquents least expect it, Mitsuhashi and Ito strike, delivering well-aimed kicks to their opponents' groins. The two successfully drive the bullies away, earning the admiration of Kyoko and the other girls. However, Mitsuhashi wastes no time in demanding his reward. Unexpectedly, Ito steps in to stop him, reminding Mitsuhashi that the problem isn't fully resolved and the bullies might return. The next day, on their way to school, Ito confronts Mitsuhashi about his underhanded fighting tactics, particularly the groin kicks. Mitsuhashi defends himself, arguing that victory is all that matters, no matter the method. Unfortunately, their differing opinions lead to a heated argument. When they arrive at school, Mitsuhashi is approached by a group of girls from Shireen High. They plead for his help to rescue Kyoko, who has been kidnapped by the Yakuza. It turns out that the delinquents Mitsuhashi and Ito defeated the previous day were connected to the Yakuza. Hearing the word Yakuza, Mitsuhashi is visibly frightened. However, Ito, who has feelings for Kyoko, is determined to rescue her alone. During class, Mitsuhashi can't focus and instead eats his lunch, preoccupied with thoughts of Ito facing the Yakuza by himself. Eventually, he excuses himself from class, claiming he's feeling sick, and leaves school early. Mitsuhashi sets off to find Ito, pushing a cart along the way. As he hurries to the rescue, Mitsuhashi accidentally kicks a can, which hits someone in the head. The person turns out to be Imai, the leader of the delinquents from Beniko High School, accompanied by his friend Yasuo. At that moment, Imai, who is furious, immediately challenges Mitsuhashi to a fight. This unexpected confrontation delays Mitsuhashi's journey to help Ito against the Yakuza. Realizing that he was going to be late, Mitsuhashi came up with a clever plan. He told Imai that if he was truly strong, he should be able to push this cart all the way from Beniko High School and bring it back. Strangely enough, Imai accepted Mitsuhashi's challenge and set off, determined to prove his strength. Meanwhile, in an abandoned building, members of the Yakuza were forcefully drugging Kyoko in an attempt to make her hallucinate. However, Kyoko was tougher than they expected and managed to put up a fight. But with the overwhelming number of Yakuza members, she was eventually overpowered and locked inside a storage locker. Not long after, Ito finally arrived to rescue Kyoko, and he already prepared himself for a one-on-one duel against the Yakuza leader. The scene shifts back to Imai, who had successfully completed Mitsuhashi's challenge. However, just as he was about to confront Mitsuhashi for a duel, he fell into a hole, one that Mitsuhashi had secretly prepared earlier while Imai was away. It was yet another example of Mitsuhashi's cunning nature. He then told Imai to wait there, as he had more important matters to attend to. Back at the abandoned building, Ito had been defeated by the Yakuza. Despite his injuries, he continued to shield Kyoko from harm. Seeing his determination, Kyoko seemed to develop feelings for him. Moments later, the Yakuza were caught off guard by an unexpected attack. Mitsuhashi and a group of Shireen High School girls had arrived. They used fire extinguishers to create a smokescreen, blinding the Yakuza. As it turned out, the cart that Mitsuhashi had made Imai push earlier was filled with these fire extinguishers. With the advantage on their side, Mitsuhashi and his allies swiftly defeated the Yakuza. With Kyoko now safe, she gratefully thanked Mitsuhashi and Ito, then invited them for a hug. Mitsuhashi, feeling pleased with himself, eagerly stepped forward, only to realize that Kyoko was actually reaching out to embrace Ito instead. Frustrated and humiliated, Mitsuhashi threw a fit, acting like a madman. Just then, the half-conscious Yakuza leader muttered that this wasn't over and that the Yakuza would come after them. Hearing this, Mitsuhashi and Ito panicked. In a desperate move, they decided to fake their identities, telling the Yakuza leader that Mitsuhashi's name was Ikabashi and Ito's was Yoshimura. On their way home, Mitsuhashi and Ito were suddenly confronted by delinquents from another school. Ever since their victory against a group of 10 fighters, they had become targets for those seeking to boost their own reputations. Just as things were about to escalate, a woman appeared and effortlessly defeated the delinquents. To their surprise, this skilled fighter turned out to be Riko, a fellow student from their school. Meanwhile, Imai and Yasuo were still waiting for Mitsuhashi, unaware that night had already fallen. The next day, a group of Yakuza members met with the leaders of the delinquents from Geisha High School, Satoshi and Sagara. The Yakuza ordered them to eliminate two individuals named Ikabashi and Yoshimura, who, unbeknownst to them, were actually Mitsuhashi and Ito. Meanwhile, Ito received a homemade lunch from Kyoko. Seeing this, Mitsuhashi became jealous and snatched the lunch away from Ito. Just then, the head of the school committee arrived to break up their fight. To their surprise, the committee leader was none other than Riko. Later that day, as Mitsuhashi and Ito were heading home from school, they happened to run into Riko. Still annoyed with her over the lunch incident, Mitsuhashi deliberately bumped into her. When he refused to apologize, Riko grew furious, and the two engaged in a heated argument that soon escalated into a fight. However, Mitsuhashi only dodged her attacks without striking back. At one point, by accident, he caught a glimpse beneath Riko's skirt. After the fight, Riko left, but something had changed. Mitsuhashi realized he had started to fall for her. That evening, during dinner at home, Mitsuhashi seemed distracted. His parents, noticing his absent-mindedness, suspected that he was in love. When they questioned him, Mitsuhashi became flustered and avoided answering. The next day at school, Mr. Mukinoki announced that two students, Ikabashi and Yoshimura, had gotten into trouble with the Yakuza. Hearing this, Ito was filled with fear, but Mitsuhashi, lost in his own thoughts about Riko, was too distracted to pay attention. After school, Mitsuhashi appeared unusually cheerful, his carefree manner evident in the way he walked. Ito, confused by his friend's behavior, wondered how Mitsuhashi could be so happy when they were being hunted by the Yakuza. Meanwhile, Kyoko was in the middle of fighting a group of female students from another high school, showcasing her wild and fierce nature. Coincidentally, Ito, who was following Mitsuhashi, happened to see Kyoko in action. However, the moment Kyoko noticed Ito, her demeanor changed instantly. She transformed from a fierce brawler into a composed and gentle girl. Ito was taken aback when he saw her smoking, but Kyoko quickly explained that the cigarette was fake and actually made of chocolate. Afterward, Ito continued his search for Mitsuhashi. The moment he left, Kyoko reverted to her barbaric self. Elsewhere, Mitsuhashi spotted Riko being taken away by a group of delinquents. Curious about what was happening, he decided to follow them. At the same time, Ito was still searching for Mitsuhashi. On his way, he came across the delinquents from Geisha High School, who were actually working for the Yakuza, and overheard them discussing their hunt for Ikabashi and Yoshimura. Realizing the danger, Ito chose to slip away rather than get caught up in more trouble. Meanwhile, Mitsuhashi had arrived at the location where the delinquents were holding Riko. Using his quick thinking, he devised a clever trick to rescue her. He then threw eggs at the delinquents, creating a distraction. However, one of them pulled out a knife and took Riko hostage. Fortunately, Mitsuhashi managed to outmaneuver them, rescuing Riko and leading her away to safety. Soon after, Ito also arrived at the scene. Noticing that Riko's hand had been cut by the knife, Mitsuhashi was furious. Without hesitation, he turned back toward the delinquents, leading them into a trap he had prepared in advance. Once they fell for it, Mitsuhashi mercilessly took them down. However, before he could go any further, Riko intervened, stopping him. She explained that these delinquents were actually students of her father, Tetsuo, who was a teacher at a dojo. Following this, Mitsuhashi was taken to Tetsuo's dojo. There, it was revealed that Riko had only been testing Mitsuhashi's strength to see if he was truly as strong as he appeared. Tetsuo then requested Mitsuhashi's help in an upcoming challenge against another dojo. He explained that a rival dojo had issued a duel challenge, where the losing dojo would be forced to disband. The battle was set to take place that very day, with each side selecting 5 representatives. Tetsuo asked both Mitsuhashi and Ito to be part of his team. While Ito agreed without hesitation, Mitsuhashi refused and chose to leave. As Mitsuhashi was about to walk away, Imai and Yasuo arrived, revealing that they had also volunteered to represent Tetsuo's dojo. However, Imai's true motivation was simply to gain Riko's attention, as he had feelings for her. He was so eager to impress her that, in his excitement, he had completely forgotten to wear pants. Moments later, Mr. Mukanoki arrived. As a dedicated teacher, he volunteered to join the team as well. Despite being afraid of fighting, he felt he couldn't show weakness in front of his students, so he reluctantly agreed to participate. With the final lineup decided, the dojo's representatives were set: Ito, Riko, Mr. Mukanoki, Imai, and Yasuo. However, Mitsuhashi suddenly changed his mind and decided to join after all, taking Riko's place in the fight. This decision irritated Riko, who was frustrated with his inconsistency. In response, she immediately threw him to the ground. Seeing Mitsuhashi bested by a girl, Imai and Yasuo couldn't help but laugh at him. Annoyed, Mitsuhashi got back on his feet and challenged Riko to a fight. This time, he managed to defeat her, and he firmly told her that he didn't want to see her get hurt. However, before he could savor his victory, Tetsuo suddenly kicked him, mistakenly believing that Mitsuhashi was trying to harm his daughter. Despite this, Riko finally acknowledged Mitsuhashi's strength. Just then, Mrs. Yamaguchi, Riko's homeroom teacher, arrived to check on her student. During this time, Mr. Mukanoki, who had a crush on Mrs. Yamaguchi, immediately tried to impress her by showing off his ridiculous martial arts moves. Meanwhile, Ito asked Mitsuhashi why he had changed his mind about fighting. Mitsuhashi admitted that while heading home earlier, he had seen the representatives from the rival dojo. They were incredibly strong, so strong that they could easily overpower street thugs. Not long after, the match began. However, Mr. Mukanoki acted rather foolishly, spotting an opponent who appeared weak and immediately choosing him as his opponent. As a result, during the fight, Mr. Mukanoki was defeated with just a single punch. For the next match, it was Imai's turn to step into the arena. Imai swiftly defeated his opponent with one powerful strike. It turned out that Imai was quite strong, even surprising the enemy dojo's leader. Soon after, Imai managed to defeat all the enemy's representatives, leaving only one fighter standing, their strongest warrior, a man named Bakuden. Unfortunately, despite his attack, Imai still lost to Bakuden. As Imai lay defeated on the ground, Bakuden spat on him. However, Ito intervened, catching the spit with his hand. In a bizarre turn of events, Mitsuhashi immediately cleaned Ito's hand with a toilet brush, even though tissues were readily available. The next match was between Bakuden and Ito. In this fight, Ito initially dominated, but Bakuden received advice from his coach to stay calm and rely on his martial arts skills. Following his coach's advice, Bakuden gained the upper hand and even managed to land a kick to Ito's neck. However, for Ito, the kick felt like nothing. He retaliated, forcing Bakuden to flee outside the arena to stop the fight. Then, as Ito let his guard down, Bakuden sneakily attacked from behind, striking Ito's eyelid and impairing his vision. Witnessing Bakuden's dirty tactics, Mitsuhashi became furious. In his excitement to chase Bakuden, Mitsuhashi jumped up, only to hit his head on the ceiling. Despite his impaired vision, Ito insisted on continuing the fight. But, with the situation, he quickly found himself overwhelmed. Just as Bakuden was about to deliver the final blow, Mitsuhashi swiftly intercepted the attack and punched Bakuden square in the face. The next match was between Bakuden and Mitsuhashi. This time, Mitsuhashi's actions were utterly unpredictable. He ripped the mat from the arena floor and kicked it toward Bakuden. Then he proceeded to stomp on Bakuden brutally. With Mitsuhashi successfully defeating Bakuden, the victory was secured for Tetsuo's dojo. It seemed that Riko had developed feelings for Mitsuhashi because of this. The next day at school, Mr. Mukanoki was back to his usual boastful self. He claimed he had helped the students during the match, even though he had been knocked out with a single punch. Meanwhile, in Mitsuhashi's classroom, Riko visited him, bringing a homemade lunchbox as a gesture of her affection. This left Mitsuhashi flustered and unsure how to react. The following day, Riko noticed Mitsuhashi engrossed in reading a comic book. As class was about to begin, Riko urged Mitsuhashi to hurry up and head to school. However, Mitsuhashi grew irritated with her for interrupting his reading. This sparked an argument between them, and Riko scolded Mitsuhashi for reading the comic without purchasing it. Shortly after, the store owner arrived. At first, Riko felt relieved, assuming the owner would reprimand Mitsuhashi. To her surprise, the owner was actually friendly with him. Frustrated by this, Riko decided to leave. Meanwhile, Imai and Yasuo had been observing Riko from a distance. Imai approached her, intending to ask her out. However, Riko declined, explaining that she already had feelings for someone else. Imai tried guessing who the person might be, but all his guesses were wrong. Initially, he hesitated to bring up Mitsuhashi, but Riko's vague responses led him to ask if Mitsuhashi was the one she liked. At that moment, Riko happily confirmed it. This revelation left Imai heartbroken, as Mitsuhashi was his rival. In his frustration, Imai threw a stone to vent his emotions, but it accidentally hit a student from Geisha High, a school notorious for its delinquents. Later, on a bridge, Imai, still seething with anger, found himself facing two students from Geisha High. He easily overpowered them, but one managed to escape. The fleeing student reported the incident to their leader, Satoshi. Enraged by the news, Satoshi immediately ordered his underlings to find Imai and bring him in. Unexpectedly, Sagara, the vice leader, volunteered to handle the situation himself. Noticing Satoshi's foul mood, Sagara suggested they grab a bite to eat first to cool off. Not long after, Yasuo was confronted by a group of Geisha High students and beaten up by Sagara. Fortunately, Imai arrived to rescue him. In the end, Sagara challenged Imai to a duel elsewhere. On the way, Sagara deceitfully struck Imai from behind, leaving him injured and vulnerable. Sagara reveled in his victory, but suddenly, Mitsuhashi appeared out of nowhere, leaping from a building and landing on Sagara, knocking him out. Mitsuhashi then proceeded to take down Sagara's remaining companions. Imai, though injured, managed to get up and thanked Mitsuhashi for saving him. However, their relief was short-lived as more Geisha High students, led by Satoshi, surrounded them. Satoshi demanded to know who had defeated Sagara. Imai lied, claiming responsibility to give Mitsuhashi a chance to escape. Unfortunately, Mitsuhashi misunderstood Imai's intentions and proudly admitted that he was the one who had taken down Sagara. The two began arguing, creating a distraction. Seizing the moment, Mitsuhashi attempted to punch Satoshi, but the blow had no effect. Panicking, Mitsuhashi tried to deceive the group to buy time for their escape. They managed to break free momentarily, but their freedom was fleeting. Soon, they were cornered and captured by the Geisha High students. Fortunately, the police arrived and caused the Geisha High School students to scatter. Seeing this, Imai and Mitsuhashi fled from the pursuing officers, eventually finding themselves in a dead-end alley. Desperate to avoid capture, Mitsuhashi made a calculated move. He pushed Imai into the river, knowing the police would prioritize rescuing him. This diversion allowed Mitsuhashi to escape unnoticed. Meanwhile, Satoshi, still reeling from the earlier blow delivered by Mitsuhashi, suddenly realized the truth. The Ikabashi and Yoshimura they had been searching for were none other than Mitsuhashi himself. The next day, Mitsuhashi stood on the school rooftop, visibly anxious about the trouble he had stirred up with Geisha High. Before long, Mr. Mukanoki approached, attempting to console him. He urged Mitsuhashi to share his troubles, but when Mitsuhashi mentioned the conflict with Geisha High, Mr. Mukanoki was visibly startled, and perhaps even a little afraid. Nevertheless, determined to maintain his cool demeanor in front of his student, Mr. Mukanoki assured Mitsuhashi that he would help, striking his signature pose for added effect. Later, as school ended, Riko approached Mitsuhashi, inviting him to join her in buying music DVDs. Mitsuhashi, however, declined, urging her to go home instead. Deep down, he feared that Riko might get dragged into his troubles with Geisha High if she stayed by his side. Elsewhere, a group of students led by Sagara confronted a student from Neo High, demanding to know Mitsuhashi's whereabouts. Just as the situation escalated, Kyoko arrived, stepping in to rescue the beleaguered student. With brutal efficiency, she took down Sagara's lackeys. But when she turned her attention to Sagara himself, he effortlessly blocked her attack. At that moment, Ito appeared, witnessing Kyoko embroiled in the brawl. The sight of Ito immediately softened Kyoko's demeanor, and the two left together, ignoring Sagara. Before they could get far, Sagara called out, demanding to know where Mitsuhashi was. Ito paused, instructing Kyoko to go ahead without him. As Ito turned to face Sagara, the latter struck him with a wooden plank, leaving him dazed and vulnerable. Sagara took advantage of Ito's weakened state, delivering a brutal beating. Sagara later rejoined his friends, boasting about his victory over Ito. Unbeknownst to him, Ito had followed. With a swift strike, Ito retaliated, smashing a wooden plank over Sagara's head. Despite his injuries, Ito single-handedly took on the Geisha High students. As Ito chased them down, Sagara ambushed him from behind, striking him with a bottle. Though severely wounded, Ito refused to stay down, eventually overpowering Sagara. However, his triumph was short-lived. Satoshi arrived, and in his weakened state, Ito was easily subdued. Just as Satoshi prepared to deliver the final blow, Ito mustered his remaining strength and counterattacked. Seeing Ito gravely injured, Sagara stepped forward, offering to finish him off in Satoshi's place. As Mitsuhashi walked away, leaving Ito in the hands of Sagara, the latter unleashed a brutal beating on Ito. Not long after, Kyoko was captured by Sagara's lackeys. Sagara demanded that Ito kneel and bow if he wanted Kyoko to be spared. With no other choice, Ito reluctantly complied. But just as he was about to submit, Mitsuhashi burst onto the scene, delivering a powerful kick that sent Sagara reeling. Moments later, Imai arrived as well, joining the fray. Panicked, Sagara chose to flee, with Mitsuhashi hot on his heels. Meanwhile, Ito and Imai stayed behind to deal with Sagara's remaining henchmen. Though badly injured, Ito found renewed strength thanks to Kyoko, who gently stroked his head, soothing his pain. On the other side of the conflict, Mitsuhashi pursued Sagara, who attempted to hide and prepare a sneak attack with a metal pipe. However, Mitsuhashi had anticipated this move. He struck Sagara from behind, knocking him unconscious. When it came to cunning, Mitsuhashi was always one step ahead. After the confrontation, Mitsuhashi regrouped with Ito and Imai in a nearby warehouse. But their respite was short-lived. Satoshi managed to track them down and challenge Mitsuhashi to a one-on-one duel. Before the fight could begin, Riko suddenly arrived with her father, and Tetsuo stepped forward, offering to take Mitsuhashi's place against Satoshi. At that moment, Mitsuhashi assumed that Tetsuo was strong, but to his disbelief, Tetsuo was knocked out with a single punch. It was a ridiculous turn of events. With that out of the way, the duel between Satoshi and Mitsuhashi finally began. Surprisingly, even without resorting to his usual underhanded tactics, Mitsuhashi managed to hold his own against Satoshi. The fight was intense and evenly matched. But just as the battle reached its peak, Mr. Mukinoki and a group of other teachers arrived, dressed in surprisingly stylish uniforms. They had come to assist Mitsuhashi, but in a comical twist, one of the teachers called the police. Chaos ensued as everyone panicked at the thought of being caught, forcing them to scatter and flee. The duel came to an abrupt end. The next day, on the school rooftop, Mitsuhashi and Ito reflected on their future, knowing they had stirred up significant trouble with Geisha High. Their conversation was interrupted by Riko, who brought news that the police had intervened and secured Geisha High. Relieved, Mitsuhashi and Ito realized they wouldn't have to face Geisha High's retaliation, at least for the time being. Several days later, Imai was seen brooding, his spirits crushed after Riko had rejected his romantic advances. To make matters worse, the sight of couples around him only fueled his frustration. Yasuo, noticing Imai's distress, suggested he try being a flirtatious man. Taking the advice to heart, Imai approached two girls nearby and attempted to charm them. However, the women found his behavior odd and quickly walked away. From a distance, Mitsuhashi and Ito witnessed the entire scene and burst into laughter, mocking Imai for being ignored. Humiliated, Imai hung his head in shame. But then, unexpectedly, Akemi appeared, handing him a love letter. Stunned by the gesture, Imai was so overwhelmed that he fainted on the spot. The scene quickly moved forward, and Imai found himself on a date with Akemi at a cafe. Nervous and unsure of what to say, Imai awkwardly suggested they arm wrestle. Surprisingly, Akemi agreed. Imai's true intention was simply to hold her hand, But the arm wrestling match only made Akemi grow fonder of him. Not stopping there, Imai then challenged her to a sumo wrestling match, and to his astonishment, Akemi agreed again. Yasuo, observing the pair, concluded that they were a perfect match. Meanwhile, Mitsuhashi and his friends arrived at the scene. Mitsuhashi seemed visibly displeased at the idea of Imai dating someone. Riko, noticing his discomfort, suggested they leave to avoid interrupting Imai and Akemi. After they departed, Imai and Akemi continued their conversation. Akemi asked Imai if he had a girlfriend, and he shyly admitted he did not. However, Mitsuhashi, still unwilling to let Imai enjoy his date, decided to return and disrupt the couple. Ito tried to stop him, but Riko advised letting Mitsuhashi be. As Ito and Riko continued their walk, Kyoko accidentally spotted them from across the street. Misinterpreting the situation, she assumed Ito was cheating on her. Back at the park, Imai and Akemi were strolling when Mitsuhashi suddenly appeared, performing an impressive backflip. Akemi was captivated by his display. Not wanting to be outdone, Imai attempted a forward roll but ended up landing in dog poop. Surprisingly, Akemi found his clumsiness endearing, which only fueled Mitsuhashi's jealousy and panic. That evening, in his room, Mitsuhashi's parents peeked in, delighted to see him studying, a rare occurrence. However, their joy was short-lived. Mitsuhashi wasn't studying at all. He was busy crafting a curse aimed at Imai. The next day, Mitsuhashi looked utterly drained, having stayed up all night. His exhaustion, however, didn't stop him from noticing Imai walking with Akemi. Frustrated that his efforts to sabotage their relationship had failed, Mitsuhashi hurled a can at Imai's head. But Imai didn't react. He simply kept walking as if nothing had happened. This only infuriated Mitsuhashi further, prompting him to throw a trash can lid at Imai. Yet again, Imai remained unfazed, continuing his stroll with Akemi, as though Mitsuhashi didn't exist. Curious, Akemi asked Imai why he wasn't angry. Imai casually dismissed Mitsuhashi, referring to him as nothing more than a type of food. Hearing this, Mitsuhashi grew even more frustrated. Being ignored was bad enough, but being compared to food was the final straw. Later, during class, Mitsuhashi found himself so preoccupied with his romantic woes that he even asked Mr. Mokonoki for advice on love. Meanwhile, Kyoko was visibly downcast, having seen Ito walking with another woman. Akemi, mistaking Kyoko's sadness for hunger, ordered one of her underlings to give Kyoko a packed meal. Kyoko then confided in Akemi, claiming that Ito was cheating on her. After school, Mitsuhashi and Ito spotted Akemi with another man. The two couldn't help but laugh, thinking Imai had been cheated on. That evening, Imai and Akemi went on another date at a cafe, with Mitsuhashi and Ito secretly watching them. A comical moment ensued when Imai leaned in to smell Akemi's perfume. He inhaled so deeply that a strand of her hair got stuck in his nose, leaving him flustered. Unable to contain himself any longer, Mitsuhashi confronted Imai, accusing Akemi of cheating. But Imai refused to believe him, dismissing his claims as jealousy. Imai then tried to leave with Akemi, only to realize he hadn't paid the bill. As a result, the cafe owner turned to Mitsuhashi, demanding he cover the cost. Reluctantly, Mitsuhashi paid, grumbling under his breath. Later that night, Imai and Akemi went to watch a horror movie at the cinema. In a bizarre twist, Imai became emotional during the film, moved to tears by the story. Akemi handed him a handkerchief to dry his eyes. As he wiped his tears, Imai noticed a somber expression on Akemi's face, as though she were deep in thought about something troubling. Here, the truth was revealed. Akemi had been preoccupied with thoughts of her boyfriend, who was being bullied by students from Geisha High. Her boyfriend had urged her to get close to someone strong by any means necessary, even if it meant pretending to be their girlfriend. The goal was to manipulate that person into standing up to the Geisha High students who tormented him. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Riko, who was confronted by Kyoko on her way home. Kyoko challenged Riko to a duel, but Tetsuo intervened, suggesting they take the fight indoors if they were serious. Once inside, the two faced off. The duel ended with Riko emerging victorious. Kyoko then asked Riko about her relationship with Ito. Realizing there had been a misunderstanding, Riko explained the situation. Over a shared meal, Kyoko apologized for her baseless accusations, and the two reconciled. Elsewhere, Imai and Akemi were saying their goodbyes on the street. Unbeknownst to them, Mitsuhashi and Ito were secretly following Akemi. She met up with her boyfriend, whose face was bruised and battered from being beaten by the geisha high students. He pressured Akemi to continue manipulating Imai into fighting on his behalf. However, it was clear that Akemi was beginning to regret deceiving Imai. Despite her hesitation, her boyfriend insisted she use Imai to confront the bullies. Unaware that Mitsuhashi and Ito were eavesdropping, Akemi and her boyfriend continued their conversation. Ito was furious at the boyfriend for exploiting others for his own gain and was about to confront him when Imai suddenly appeared, stopping Ito in his tracks. Seeing Imai, Akemi tearfully apologized for deceiving him. Imai returned her handkerchief and thanked her for making his youth memorable. With that, he walked away. The next day, Akemi's boyfriend approached the geisha high students to hand over protection money. Akemi followed, delivering the money herself and demanding they stop harassing her boyfriend. Instead of complying, the students attempted to harass her as well. Fortunately, Imai arrived just in time, defeating the bullies and saving Akemi. That night, a heartbroken Imai confided in Yasuo about his romantic troubles. The following day, Mitsuhashi visited the teacher's lounge because he had forgotten his lunch. In a comical twist, all the teachers were intimidated by him and offered their own lunches. However, Mitsuhashi chose Mrs. Yamaguchi's meal. Just as he was about to eat, Ito pulled him aside, informing him that Imai was being overwhelmed by geisha high students while trying to rescue Kyoko and her boyfriend, who had been kidnapped. Meanwhile, Imai was struggling in his fight against the geisha high students, vastly outnumbered and outmatched. Thankfully, Mitsuhashi and Ito arrived to help. Using his usual cunning tactics, Mitsuhashi threw a net over the geisha high students, trapping them. With their opponents immobilized, Mitsuhashi, Ito, and Imai swiftly defeated them, rescuing Akemi and her boyfriend. The defeated students reported the incident to Satoshi and Sagara, blaming Mitsuhashi, Ito, and Imai for their humiliation. Enraged, Sagara berated his lackeys for tarnishing Geisha High's reputation. The following day, after school, Mitsuhashi invited Riko to a cafe. As they arrived, they spotted Sagawa with his girlfriend. Mitsuhashi, ever the social butterfly, invited Sagawa and his girlfriend to join them, much to Riko's disappointment. She had been hoping for some one-on-one time with Mitsuhashi. Meanwhile, trouble was brewing elsewhere. A Tokyo delinquent named Yutaka had come to town for a festival. With many people from other cities flocking to Tokyo, Sagawa, Mitsuhashi's classmate from Chiba, had also made the trip. Yutaka, spotting the timid-looking Sagawa, decided to target him. He roughed Sagawa up and stole his wallet. Sagawa, in a desperate attempt to defend himself, threatened Yutaka by claiming that Mitsuhashi and Ito would come after him. Yutaka, however, was unfazed and continued to beat Sagawa mercilessly. Fortunately, the police arrived just in time, forcing Yutaka to flee. As Yutaka ran from the police, he bumped into his friend Goru. At that moment, Goru advised Yutaka to lay low and took him to a building where two other friends, Konu and Iwata, were waiting. Here, Yutaka recounted how he had just mugged and beaten up someone from Chiba. Hearing this, Konu suggested they head to Chiba to have some fun and prove that Tokyo delinquents were superior to those from Chiba. Yutaka expressed concern about potential retaliation, mentioning that the guy he had beaten had threatened him with names like Mitsuhashi and Ito. Instead of being deterred, Konu became even more excited, rallying his friends to go to Chiba and take down Mitsuhashi and Ito. Back at Neo High that evening, the teachers received news that one of their students, Sagawa, had been hospitalized in Tokyo after being attacked by delinquents. Mr. Mukanoki, ever the dedicated teacher, decided to visit Sagawa in the hospital. The next day, Riko informed Mitsuhashi and Ito about Sagawa's condition. Furious, Mitsuhashi and Ito vowed to get revenge. Meanwhile, the Tokyo delinquents had already arrived in Chiba. Goru, who had been gathering information, reported to his friends that he had learned from a Neo High student they had just beaten that Mitsuhashi was a formidable fighter who relied on more than just brute strength. Goro also mentioned that the strongest fighters at Neo High were Mitsuhashi and Ito, and that there was a notorious delinquent school in Chiba called Geisha High. Konu and Iwata laughed at the idea, dismissing Geisha High as insignificant and boasting that they would take them all down. Unbeknownst to them, a Geisha High student overheard their conversation. Furious at the disrespect shown to his school, he confronted them, only to be quickly overpowered and beaten by Goro, Konu, and Iwata. At that moment, Yutaka grew anxious, fearing that Geisha High would come after them for beating up one of their students. However, Konu brushed off his concerns with a casual remark, suggesting they could simply return to Tokyo if things got too heated. Meanwhile, the Geisha High student who had been beaten reported the incident to Satoshi and Sagara, informing them that the Tokyo delinquents had challenged Geisha High. Satoshi was furious and immediately ordered his underlings to track down the Tokyo delinquents. Elsewhere, a young man was seen battered and bruised, another victim of the Tokyo delinquents. The delinquents had taken over his home, using it as their hideout. Konu instructed his friends to change their clothes, rendering the descriptions given by the Geisha High students useless. Sure enough, when they walked down the street, the Geisha High students passed them by without a second glance. While wandering the streets, the Tokyo delinquents crossed paths with Imai and Yasuo. They asked about Mitsuhashi and Ito, but Imai refused to answer and walked away. Iwata, irritated, picked up a trash can and hurled it at Imai. Enraged, Imai fought back, but he was quickly overwhelmed by the sheer number of attackers and ultimately defeated. As he fell, Imai accidentally bumped his head against Konu, which only infuriated him further. In a fit of rage, Konu brutally beat Imai. Shortly after, Ito noticed a commotion on the street. When he approached, he found Imai and Yasuo badly beaten. Yasuo, still conscious, informed Ito that their attackers were looking for him and Mitsuhashi. Meanwhile, the Tokyo delinquents encountered Mitsuhashi, though they didn't realize it was him at first. They asked about Mitsuhashi and Ito, and Mitsuhashi boldly revealed his identity. Yutaka then admitted that he was the one who had beaten Sagawa. Hearing this, Mitsuhashi flew into a rage, and a fight broke out. Konu managed to land a kick on Mitsuhashi's back, but despite being outnumbered, Mitsuhashi held his own, even landing a solid punch on Iwata's face. Before long, the Geisha High student who had been beaten earlier returned with reinforcements. Seeing the approaching mob, the Tokyo delinquents fled the scene. After the fight, Mitsuhashi walked away, trying to act cool as if nothing had happened. However, the pain from Konu's kick lingered, and suddenly, Mitsuhashi collapsed. Mitsuhashi, now unconscious, was carried to a nearby park by Akemi and Kyoko. They called Ito and Riko to inform them of Mitsuhashi's condition. Riko asked Mitsuhashi why he had fainted. Not wanting to worry her, Mitsuhashi lied, claiming he had been hit by a slow-moving car. To prove he was fine, he even did some stretches, pretending everything was normal. Relieved, Riko invited Mitsuhashi to visit Sagawa at the Tokyo hospital. Mitsuhashi told her to go ahead, saying he would catch up later with Ito. Once the women had left, Mitsuhashi revealed the truth to Ito. He had just fought the Tokyo delinquents who had beaten Sagawa. Together, they decided to hunt down the delinquents. Meanwhile, the Tokyo delinquents were hiding from the Geisha High students. Yutaka was visibly terrified, but his friends seemed to be enjoying the chaos, treating it all like a game. Iwata's tooth had been knocked out during the fight with Mitsuhashi. As Yutaka stepped out of their hiding spot, he spotted a Geisha High student. Without hesitation, Konu hurled a bottle at the student, striking him down. A short while later, Mitsuhashi and Ito came across the Geisha High student who had been struck by the bottle. He was lying on the ground after he was beaten by the Tokyo delinquents. Before long, a group of Geisha High students appeared behind Mitsuhashi and Ito. Panicking, Mitsuhashi quickly explained that they weren't the ones responsible, it was the Tokyo delinquents. Since Mitsuhashi and Geisha High now shared a common enemy, they decided to put their differences aside for the time being and focus on tracking down the delinquents who were still on the loose. Elsewhere, Konu hatched a plan to send a challenge letter to Mitsuhashi. Meanwhile, at the Tokyo hospital, Riko and Mr. Mokonoki were visiting Sagawa. That night, as Mitsuhashi sat in his room, a rock was thrown through his window. Attached to it was a challenge letter from the Tokyo delinquents. Mitsuhashi and Ito immediately headed to the location specified in the letter. Notably, Ito's hair, usually spiked like a hedgehog, was styled normally for once. On the other side, Yutaka urged his friends to head to the challenge location, but Konu and the others admitted they had no intention of going. They had written the letter as a joke. Frustrated, Yutaka decided to go alone. Back at the challenge site, Mitsuhashi and Ito waited impatiently for the delinquents, who never showed up. Bored and annoyed, they were about to leave when Yutaka arrived by himself. Yutaka braced himself, expecting to be ganged up on by Mitsuhashi and Ito. To his surprise, Ito stepped forward to face him one-on-one. Without breaking a sweat, Ito defeated Yutaka, leaving him bewildered. Yutaka couldn't understand how Ito was so strong, especially since his hair looked so ordinary. The next morning, Mitsuhashi's parents were shocked to find Yutaka, battered and bruised, lying in front of their house. Mitsuhashi came out and saw Yutaka's severely beaten face, along with another challenge letter. Mitsuhashi then informed Ito that Yutaka had been abandoned by his friends. Ito was furious at the betrayal and suggested they head to the challenge location after school. When they arrived, Konu and Iwata ambushed them from behind with a wooden plank. At the same time, the Geisha High students showed up dragging Goro, who had been beaten. Seeing this, Iwata and Konu fled, with the Geisha High students hot on their heels. Unexpectedly, Mitsuhashi and Ito sprinted past the Geisha High students, overtaking them with incredible speed. As they reached a bridge, Konu pushed Iwata down to slow their pursuers, allowing Konu to escape in a taxi back to Tokyo. At that moment, Mitsuhashi approached Iwata, demanding to know where Konu lived. Surprisingly, Iwata revealed he knew nothing about Konu, not even his real name. As Mitsuhashi and Ito made their way home, they encountered Konu, who was preparing to return to Tokyo. Before leaving, Konu taunted Mitsuhashi and Ito. At that moment, Ito was worried, knowing it would be difficult to track Konu down in Tokyo, especially without knowing his real name. But Mitsuhashi reassured him, saying he already had a plan to find Konu. The next day at Konu's school, whose real name was Shirahara. At that moment, it became clear that Shirahara was known as a bright and kind-hearted student, a stark contrast to his delinquent persona. Not long after, a teacher approached Shirahara to inform him that his face was in the newspaper for saving a dog from an accident. Shirahara was confused, as he had no memory of such an act. The teacher explained that the dog's owner wanted to thank him in person. Shirahara was taken to the staff room, where he was introduced to the dog's owner, none other than Mitsuhashi. Using his signature cunning, Mitsuhashi had orchestrated the meeting, ensuring that others would lead Shirahara straight to him. Mitsuhashi and Ito then escorted Shirahara to an open field. Frustrated at being found out, Shirahara lashed out at Mitsuhashi, but he deflected the attack by tearing up a photo of the dog. Unexpectedly, Mitsuhashi had also invited Shirahara's friends to the field. Mitsuhashi then staged a scene, pretending that Shirahara had torn up the photo of his beloved dog. This act turned Shirahara's friends against him. Panicking, Shirahara revealed his true nature and attacked Mitsuhashi, but he easily overpowered him. Shirahara pretended to faint, hoping Mitsuhashi would leave him alone, but Mitsuhashi saw through the act and delivered a final blow. The next day, Sagawa is seen leaving the hospital as he had fully recovered. Meanwhile, Mr. Mukinoki was spotted at a brothel, eagerly awaiting his turn. As he waited, Mitsahashi's father, Ichiro, stumbled in, clearly drunk. Recognizing Ichiro, Mr. Mukinoki panicked and covered his face. Ichiro, feeling that the man before him looked familiar, tried to guess his identity but failed. Relieved, Mr. Mukinoki thought he had escaped detection, until a brothel employee called out his name, announcing that it was his turn. Realizing the man before him was Mitsahashi's teacher, Ichiro confronted him. Mr. Mukinoki continued to deny his identity, but the employee exposed him, calling him a teacher from Neo High with a questionable reputation. With his cover blown, Mr. Mukinoki fled, with Ichiro following him outside. Still drunk, Ichiro was confused as to why Mr. Mukanoki had left in such a hurry. It was only then that Ichiro realized he had mistakenly entered a brothel instead of the massage parlor next door. Understanding Mr. Mukanoki's panic, Ichiro decided to let it slide, reasoning that teaching was a stressful job and an occasional visit to such a place wasn't the end of the world. As Ichiro headed to the massage parlor, Mr. Mukanoki intercepted him. Desperate to keep a secret, Mr. Mukanoki threatened to report Ichiro to his wife and son for visiting the brothel. Now it was Ichiro's turn to panic, and the two struck a deal to keep the night's events under wraps. The next day at school, Mr. Mukanoki announced that, for the next week, Mitsuhashi would have to obey his every command. Surprisingly, Mitsuhashi accepted without protest. The class was baffled. Mitsuhashi, the unruly student, was now willingly following orders. Mr. Mukanoki then ordered Mitsuhashi to give him a massage, and Mitsuhashi complied. As he massaged, Mitsuhashi expressed his deep respect for Mr. Mukanoki, leaving Ito puzzled by his uncharacteristic behavior. When it was time to leave the classroom, Mr. Mukanoki pretended to be injured, and Mitsuhashi offered to carry him to the staff room. Upon arrival, Mrs. Yamaguchi questioned why Mr. Mukanoki was being carried. Mr. Mukanoki explained that, for the next week, Mitsuhashi would obey his every word. At that moment, Mr. Sorimachi was skeptical, but Mitsuhashi clarified that he had made a deal with his father to serve as Mr. Mukanoki's subordinate for the week. Hearing this, Mr. Sakamoto, who was jealous of Mr. Mukanoki, approached Mitsuhashi and demanded that he show him the same respect. Naturally, Mitsuhashi refused. Later, on their way home from school, Ito asked Mitsuhashi why he was so willing to obey Mr. Mukanoki. Mitsuhashi explained that he had made a deal with his father to follow all of Mr. Mukanoki's orders for a week. Hearing this, Riko felt proud of Mitsuhashi for keeping his promise to his father. However, when Ito pressed for the reason behind Ichiro's sudden demand for such an agreement, Mitsuhashi shrugged it off, saying he didn't care as long as he was promised a substantial reward. This response disappointed Riko, who had initially been impressed by Mitsuhashi's sense of responsibility. Mitsuhashi then jokingly offered Riko that he would do anything she asked if she rewarded him. When Riko asked what kind of reward he wanted, Mitsuhashi cheekily replied that he wanted to touch her breasts. Outraged, Riko punched him so hard that he passed out. That evening, Mr. Sakamoto was seen returning home from work, still puzzled as to why Mitsuhashi, the notorious delinquent of Neo High, was obeying Mr. Mukanoki. His jealousy toward Mr. Mukanoki only grew. Meanwhile, at a Yakuza headquarters, an announcement was made that the group would be disbanded, as they could no longer keep up with the times. In the end, the Yakuza boss tearfully bid farewell to his members. Back with Mr. Sakamoto, as he walked home, he accidentally bumped into someone. Seeing Mr. Sakamoto's timid demeanor, the man demanded compensation. Mr. Sakamoto tried to flee, but ended up colliding with another person, who turned out to be a former Yakuza member. The Yakuza member was initially angry, but when a wooden plank nearly fell on him, his anger subsided. The man who had demanded compensation approached, but the Yakuza member instead defended Mr. Sakamoto, thanking him for inadvertently saving his life by causing him to move out of harm's way. The Yakuza member then explained that he was now unemployed due to the disbandment of his organization. Unexpectedly, Mr. Sakamoto offered him a position as a guidance counselor at his school, and the former Yakuza member, now named Mr. Gyuden, accepted enthusiastically. The next day at Neo High, Mr. Gyuden began his new role as a trainee guidance counselor. The other teachers were skeptical about how a former Yakuza member could become a teacher, but Mr. Sakamoto assured them that the principal had approved the decision and that he would personally mentor Mr. Gyuden. During break time, Mitsuhashi and his friends carried Mr. Mukanoki around like a king, causing a commotion. However, Mr. Sakamoto and Mr. Gyuden soon arrived. Mr. Gyuden was furious about the disturbance and demanded an explanation. At that moment, Mitsuhashi claimed that Mr. Mukanoki had ordered him to do it. Enraged, Mr. Gyuden swung at Mr. Mukanoki, but Mitsuhashi stepped in, taking the hit to protect his teacher. Riko, witnessing the violence, confronted Mr. Gyuden, condemning his actions as inappropriate for a school environment. Mr. Gyuden responded by shouting that anyone who messed with Mr. Sakamoto would have to deal with him. After the incident, Mitsuhashi and Ito played badminton with a ping-pong ball on the school rooftop. When Riko arrived, Mitsuhashi lost focus and accidentally dropped the ball, which hit Mr. Sakamoto below. Empowered by Mr. Gyudin's protection, Mr. Sakamoto's personality had undergone a complete transformation. No longer timid, he boldly scolded Mitsuhashi for his carelessness. Annoyed, Mitsuhashi quickly descended from the rooftop and instructed Riko to call Sagawa. He then grabbed a coconut from the lab and returned to the roof. Once there, he ordered Sagawa to throw the coconut at Mr. Gyudin. However, when the coconut was hurled toward Mr. Gyudin, he effortlessly smashed it with his bare hands. Furious, Mr. Gyudin stormed up to the rooftop, but by the time he arrived, Mitsuhashi and his friends had already fled. Witnessing this, Mitsuhashi was stunned by Mr. Gyudin's strength. To test it further, he threw a coconut at Ito. At that moment, Ito tried to smash it but ended up hurting his hand instead, confirming that they were no match for Mr. Gyudin. Mitsuhashi then told Ito to throw the coconut back at him. Ito assumed Mitsuhashi could break it, but Mitsuhashi clarified that when faced with a hard object, the best course of action was to dodge it. Not long after, Mr. Sakamoto and Mr. Gyudin arrived, demanding to know who had thrown the coconut. Mitsuhashi and Ito denied any involvement. Mr. Gyudin, using his keen sense of smell, sniffed them out to determine if they were lying. His nose confirmed that Mitsuhashi and Ito were innocent. Mr. Sakamoto and Mr. Gyudin then confronted Sagawa, quickly deducing that he was the culprit. As punishment, Sagawa was forced to shave his head bald. Mr. Mukanoki, unwilling to let his students suffer alone, confronted Mr. Sakamoto in the staff room. He was furious, but Mr. Sakamoto retorted that Mr. Mukanoki was incompetent at disciplining students. Enraged, Mr. Mukanoki was about to strike Mr. Sakamoto when Mr. Gyudin intervened. Intimidated by Mr. Gyudin, Mr. Mukanoki backed down and even reluctantly agreed with Mr. Sakamoto's harsh punishment. As a result, the students watching from the doorway were deeply disappointed in Mr. Mukanoki. That evening, on their way home from work, Mr. Sakamoto confided in Mr. Gyudin that he was often harassed by Geisha High students when passing through a certain area. Hearing this, Mr. Gyudin vowed to deal with the Geisha High students. Shortly after, Mr. Gyudin confronted Satoshi and Sagara's group, easily overpowering them. However, Sagara managed to jab Mr. Gyudin in the eye, allowing his group to retreat. Later, Mr. Sakamoto and Mr. Gyudin visited Riko at her home, as she was the head of the school committee. They tried to recruit her to their cause, but Riko refused. Before leaving, Tetsuo challenged Mr. Gyudin to a duel, but the moment Mr. Gyudin grabbed him, Tetsuo was too terrified to continue. Meanwhile, at Mitsuhashi's house, Ichiro admitted that the reason he had suddenly made a deal with Mitsuhashi was to silence Mr. Mukanoki. He didn't want Mr. Mukanoki to reveal to Mitsuhashi and his wife that he had accidentally wandered into a brothel. Upon hearing this, Mitsuhashi's mother immediately scolded her husband. Ichiro apologized and told Mitsuhashi that he no longer had to obey Mr. Mukanoki's every command. The next day, Mr. Gyudin punished Imai and Yasuo for wandering around during break time, even though Imai was a student from another school. Imai tried to fight back using Mitsuhashi's tricks, but it was all in vain. Back at Neo High, Mitsuhashi and Ito saw their classmates, who had been forcibly shaved bald by Mr. Gyudin and Mr. Sakamoto. Meanwhile, in the staff room, Ichiro angrily revealed that Mr. Mukanoki had visited a brothel. Back with Mitsuhashi and Ito, they were approached by Mr. Sakamoto and Mr. Gyudin, who threatened to shave their heads as well. Hearing this, the two immediately fled. As Mitsuhashi and Ito prepared their plan to defeat Mr. Gyudin, Riko arrived with another female student whose head had been shaved. Seeing this, Ito grew furious and smashed a coconut in front of him. Meanwhile, Mr. Sakamoto and Mr. Gyudin were about to search for Mitsuhashi when they were stopped by the other teachers. The teachers demanded that Mr. Gyudin and Mr. Sakamoto put an end to the forced head shaving of students. Just then, a coconut came flying toward Mr. Gyudin. He punched it, causing it to shatter, but it had been filled with pepper by Mitsuhashi, temporarily blinding Mr. Gyudin. While Mr. Gyudin was incapacitated, Mitsuhashi and Ito launched a combined attack. Finally, the two managed to defeat Mr. Gyudin. As Mitsuhashi and Ito were about to turn their attention to Mr. Sakamoto, Mr. Mukinoki intervened, slapping Mr. Sakamoto to snap him out of his behavior and return him to his former self. On their way home from school, Kyoko approached Ito, relieved that he hadn't been shaved bald. She gently patted his hair, expressing her happiness. Meanwhile, it turned out that Mr. Gyudin had been expelled from Neo High and was now teaching at Geisha High. Sometime later, Mitsuhashi spotted Yasuo in front of the school. As he was about to go down to meet him, Mitsuhashi noticed Imai slipping a letter into Riko's shoe locker. After Imai left, Mitsuhashi quickly read the letter, which invited Riko to meet near the restroom by the park. Mitsuhashi decided to play a prank on Imai there. Soon after, Ito arrived and saw Mitsuhashi rushing off. Not long after, Riko also arrived, and Ito noticed the letter that had fallen on the ground. Meanwhile, Mitsuhashi reached the restroom and found a baseball bat. He planned to use it to scare Imai. However, as he was about to hide inside, Mitsuhashi discovered the body of a dead person, their head bloodied as if struck by a blunt object. Shortly after, Ito and Riko arrived and assumed Mitsuhashi was the murderer, especially since he was holding a blood-stained baseball bat. Imai also showed up, carrying flowers for Riko. He was shocked to see that the deceased was a student from their school. Imai accused Mitsuhashi of the crime, but Mitsuhashi insisted he was innocent, his face filled with panic. Not long after, the sound of police sirens echoed in the distance. Terrified, Mitsuhashi decided to head home, but as he approached, he saw two police officers already searching for him. Spotting Mitsuhashi, the officers gave chase. With no other option, Mitsuhashi ran and hid in a patch of tall grass. Once he felt safe, he planned to go to Riko's house, but the police were already there, questioning Tetsuo about Mitsuhashi. Tetsuo, who disliked Mitsuhashi getting close to his daughter, spoke ill of him and urged the police to arrest him immediately. That night, Mitsuhashi was starving, having spent the entire day evading the police. Desperate, he followed the scent of food to an elderly woman's home. Startled, the woman threw water at him. Just then, the police arrived, forcing Mitsuhashi to flee again. Shortly after, Mitsuhashi hid under a bridge, cold, hungry, and utterly miserable. As he sat there, reflecting on his predicament, Mitsuhashi was startled by a floating flame in front of him. When he turned around, he saw the ghost of the deceased person. Terrified, Mitsuhashi could only scream for mercy, his voice trembling with fear. However, it turned out that this was all just a prank orchestrated by Imai. At that moment, Imai and his friends burst into laughter, delighted that they had successfully fooled Mitsuhashi. Imai explained that the police and the dead person were actually his friends in disguise. Mitsuhashi, still in shock, could only stare blankly, utterly dazed. Imai instructed Yasuo to take a photo of him with Mitsuhashi as a memento of his victory. Grinning triumphantly, Imai declared that Mitsuhashi was even dumber than he was. The next day at school, Mitsuhashi still seemed disoriented, haunted by the events of the previous night. Even when Ito informed him that Imai had distributed flyers boasting about how he had pranked Mitsuhashi, he appeared indifferent. Not long after, Imai popped up by the window. Riko scolded Imai, telling him that his prank had gone too far. She warned him to stay away from Mitsuhashi, as he would undoubtedly seek revenge someday. Meanwhile, Mitsuhashi sat in the staff room, still in a daze. Mr. Mukinoki found this behavior unusual, as Mitsuhashi was usually lively and chaotic. This time, however, he was eerily quiet. Mr. Mizutani attempted to hypnotize Mitsuhashi to get him to open up about his troubles. Ironically, while trying to hypnotize Mitsuhashi, Mr. Mizutani accidentally hypnotized Mr. Mukinoki instead. As a result, Mr. Sorimachi had to snap Mr. Mukinoki out of it. The scene then shifted to Imai, who looks anxious after hearing Riko's warning about Mitsuhashi seeking revenge. Soon after, he ran into Yasuo, who had styled his hair to resemble Ito's. Yasuo explained that he was afraid Mitsuhashi would retaliate, so he changed his hairstyle to avoid being recognized. Meanwhile, on the school rooftop, Mitsuhashi was deep in thought, trying to process how he had been outsmarted by Imai who was supposedly less intelligent than him. Suddenly, it dawned on him that Imai had been the sole mastermind behind the prank. A dark expression crossed Mitsahashi's face as he vowed to get his revenge. The scene returned to Imai. As he walked, a flower pot fell from the rooftop, narrowly missing him. Furious, Imai rushed to the rooftop to confront Mitsuhashi, only to find that Mitsuhashi had already descended to the ground. Later, while walking down the street, Imai noticed a group of children pointing at a photo of him placed near dog poop. The children began calling him the king of poop. Realizing this was Mitsuhashi's doing, Imai grew even angrier. As he searched for Mitsuhashi, he encountered a group of geisha high students. Unbeknownst to him, Mitsuhashi was lurking behind, holding a can. Acting quickly, Mitsuhashi hurled the can at the geisha high students and quickly fled. The can hit Satoshi, who, seeing only Imai nearby, blamed him for the attack. Despite Imai's protests, the geisha high students didn't believe him and began chasing him. After narrowly escaping the geisha high students, Imai ran into Mitsuhashi, who taunted him further. Furious, Imai chased Mitsuhashi into a building, entering a room where he thought Mitsuhashi was hiding. However, when Imai tried to leave, he discovered the doorknob was missing, trapping him inside. Outside the room, Mitsuhashi was thrilled that his trap had worked. When Imai looked out the window, he realized he was on an upper floor. From the adjacent room, Mitsuhashi mockingly told Imai that he would be locked in there until he died. Terrified, Imai screamed for help, but it was futile. Mitsuhashi had already predicted that no one would be around to hear his cries. As Mitsuhashi was about to leave Imai trapped in the room, he discovered that the doorknob on his own door was also missing. Defeated, he returned to the room with a weary expression. Imai couldn't help but laugh at Mitsuhashi, who had fallen into his own trap. Now it was Mitsuhashi's turn to scream for help. At that moment, Imai gleefully told Mitsuhashi that he wouldn't survive this ordeal. However, that night, Imai regretted his words, realizing that he had condemned Mitsuhashi to the same fate he was facing. Later, as Imai peered out the window, he asked Mitsuhashi what he was doing. Mitsuhashi held up a can of food, but admitted he couldn't open it. Imai revealed that he had a knife and offered to open the can, suggesting they share the food. However, Imai didn't trust Mitsuhashi, knowing his reputation for deceit. Instead, Imai offered to open the can himself and split the contents. Feeling hurt by Imai's lack of trust, Mitsuhashi decided to throw the can away. Seeing this, Imai felt a pang of guilt and apologized for doubting him. Mitsuhashi then asked for the knife again. Once he had it, Mitsuhashi used a wire to retrieve the can and devoured its contents, leaving Imai frustrated at being tricked once more. After finishing the food, Imai laughed and pulled out a pack of gum, chewing it slowly in front of Mitsuhashi. Now it was Mitsuhashi's turn to feel envious, as Imai boasted that the gum would help him survive longer. Eventually, Imai stepped back into the room, followed by Mitsuhashi, who revealed that he had been lying about being trapped the whole time. Mitsuhashi had simply been playing along. He left the building and returned home, happily enjoying his mother's cooking. Meanwhile, Imai was left choking on the gum he had swallowed, unable to wash it down with water. The next day, as school ended, Riko invited Mitsuhashi to a cafe, but he declined, claiming he had other matters to attend to. Meanwhile, Imai dreamed of a woman offering him water, only to wake up and realize he was severely dehydrated. He heard Yasuo's voice and rushed to the window, but it turned out to be a hallucination. Just then, Mitsuhashi appeared, looking weak and claiming he was thirsty. Imai admitted he was also parched, and Mitsuhashi jokingly suggested he drink his own urine. Even handing him a cup, Mitsuhashi burst into laughter at the thought. But Imai replied that he couldn't produce any urine since he hadn't had anything to drink all day. The two returned to the room, and the contrast between them was stark. Imai was starving and dehydrated, while Mitsuhashi casually snacked on a box of treats and sipped from a water bottle. Imai weakly declared that he was going to die soon. Mitsuhashi stifled his laughter, not wanting Imai to hear him. Then, suggested that Imai eat his leather shoes, claiming they were made of cowhide and therefore edible. Desperate, Imai tried to eat his shoe but gave up after realizing how terrible it tasted. As Imai looked out the window, he spotted Akemi and Kyoko outside. Summoning the last of his strength, he screamed for help. However, Mitsuhashi joined in the shouting, drowning out Imai's cries. Akemi and Kyoko didn't hear him and walked away, leaving Imai even more frustrated. Mitsuhashi then called out to Imai, offering him a banana peel. Starving, Imai eagerly ate it, much to Mitsuhashi's amusement. Mitsuhashi laughed so hard he rolled on the floor. Not stopping there, Mitsuhashi next offered Imai a piece of straw, which Imai happily accepted as if it were a feast. At that moment, Mitsuhashi secretly took a photo of Imai in this pitiful state. The sight of Imai eating straw was so hilarious that Mitsuhashi banged his head against the wall in laughter. Finally, Mitsuhashi handed Imai an eggshell, which Imai devoured with the same enthusiasm. That night, Imai took out a steel wire with a fishing hook attached, attempting to retrieve the rope below so he could escape. Mitsuhashi, pretending to be weak, urged Imai to do it instead. Just as Imai was about to succeed in grabbing the rope, Mitsuhashi had already climbed down and cut the hooked wire. Realizing that Mitsuhashi had tricked him, Imai fainted. After pranking Imai, Mitsuhashi went to the adjacent room to find Yasuo and pulled the same trick on him. The next day, Mitsuhashi spread embarrassing photos of Imai and Yasuo in public, leaving both of them humiliated. Time passed, and a new school year began. Mitsuhashi was now in his third year. During class, Mr. Mukinoki asked Mitsuhashi about his plans after graduating high school. With confidence, Mitsuhashi declared that he would move to Tokyo for university. The entire class was shocked, but his reason for going to Tokyo was even more surprising. He wanted to become the strongest delinquent in the city. However, Mr. Mukinoki calmly informed him that college students in Tokyo were not interested in fighting. Hearing this, Mitsuhashi was visibly disappointed. After Mr. Mukinoki's class ended, Mitsuhashi, Ito, and Riko walked downstairs, passing through the first-year students' hallway. To their surprise, the first-year students admired Mitsuhashi and Ito, as they were already famous for being the strongest in Nayo High School. As a result, Mitsuhashi walked through the corridor shyly, while Ito remained unfazed. Feeling proud of his new fans, Mitsuhashi decided to entertain them with a dance performance. After they left, a first-year student approached Sagawa and declared that he would gather a group to take down Mitsuhashi. However, Sagawa warned him that defeating Mitsuhashi was nearly impossible. Ignoring the warning, the first-year student remained determined. At school, Mitsuhashi was delighted by his newfound popularity. Since he was now well-liked, he sought Riko's advice on how to become a better person. Riko agreed to help him change his cunning ways. As Mitsuhashi walked alongside Riko, the same first-year student suddenly threw something at him and challenged him to a fight. Riko advised Mitsuhashi to act maturely and refuse the challenge. Following her advice, Mitsuhashi declined. This only increased the admiration the first-year students had for Mitsuhashi, seeing him as someone with a noble character. After Mitsuhashi left, the first-year student was suddenly dragged away. Not long after, he was found badly beaten. When Sagawa saw him, he assumed that Mitsuhashi was responsible, but it turned out that another group of first-year students had ganged up on him. Their true intention was to defeat Mitsuhashi and claim the title of the strongest in Nayo High. Shortly after, Mitsuhashi arrived. Fearing that his underhanded fighting tactics would be exposed in front of his fans, he chose not to engage and instead instructed Sagawa to fight for him. Sagawa attempted to take them on, but was easily defeated due to his lack of strength. Just then, Riko arrived, intervened, and single-handedly took down the entire group. Riko told Mitsuhashi that if someone used dirty tricks, he should fight back. Witnessing Riko's impressive strength, Mitsuhashi's fans shifted their admiration to her, believing that she was the true strongest student in Nayo High. Seeing his fans turn away from him, Mitsuhashi sulked and pouted at Riko. In his frustration, he accidentally pushed Riko, but his hand ended up touching her chest. Reacting instinctively, Riko slammed him to the ground. Later, Mitsuhashi met Ito on the school rooftop and recounted the entire incident. Upon hearing it, Ito burst into uncontrollable laughter, amused that the first-year students now idolized Riko's more than Mitsuhashi. Meanwhile, a first-year student appeared, carrying a helmet and a baseball bat. Known as the Helmet Boy, he began attacking other first years, demanding to know who the strongest person at Nayo High School was. He continued his search until he encountered Sagawa. The Helmet Boy then asked Sagawa who the strongest person in the school was. Sagawa informed him that the strongest person was on the rooftop. However, instead of heading straight there, the Helmet Boy struck Sagawa. Feeling dejected, Sagawa lamented being beaten once again by a first-year student. At the same time, Mitsuhashi and Ito were having a conversation when they noticed the Helmet Boy. On the other hand, the Helmet Boy, upon reaching the rooftop and finding no one there, decided to leave. He returned to the first-year hallway and encountered the same student he had assaulted earlier. A female student then scolded the Helmet Boy for his violent behavior, but instead of listening, he acted aggressively toward her and demanded to know who the strongest person at Nayo High School was. The female student answered that the strongest individual was Riko. Upon hearing this, the Helmet Boy immediately set out to find Riko, even going as far as entering her classroom. At the same time, Riko was on the rooftop, meeting Mitsuhashi. She apologized to him for unintentionally taking away his fans. However, Mitsuhashi was still sulking and told Riko to leave. Meanwhile, the Helmet Boy was still searching for Riko. Just then, Riko's homeroom teacher, Mrs. Yamaguchi, arrived, dressed in battle gear. Realizing that Riko was in danger, Mrs. Yamaguchi decided to confront the Helmet Boy herself. However, the Helmet Boy struck Mrs. Yamaguchi, leaving her injured and sending her to the school infirmary. Seeing what had happened to Mrs. Yamaguchi, Mr. Mukinoki was enraged. He ordered Mitsuhashi and Ito to capture the Helmet Boy. At that moment, Mrs. Yamaguchi informed them that the Helmet Boy was specifically targeting Riko. However, Mitsuhashi, still upset with Riko, chose to walk away instead of helping. Elsewhere, the Helmet Boy finally confronted Riko. Rather than fighting back, Riko attempted to evade his attacks. Unfortunately, her reluctance to engage in combat allowed the Helmet Boy to land a kick on her. Riko tried to explain that she was not the strongest person at Nayo High, but the Helmet Boy refused to listen. Just as he was about to strike her again, Ito arrived and intervened, protecting Riko. With a single punch, Ito managed to knock the Helmet Boy down. However, because the Helmet Boy was wearing a helmet, Ito's hand was injured in the process. Seizing the opportunity, the Helmet Boy struck Ito from behind and continued to pummel him as he lay on the ground. Then the Helmet Boy turned his attention back to Riko. Fortunately, Akemi and Kyoko arrived just in time to help. Together, they managed to overpower the Helmet Boy once again. When Kyoko appeared before him, Ito immediately stood up. At the same time, he saw the Helmet Boy getting back on his feet, preparing to attack Kyoko. Without hesitation, Ito punched the Helmet Boy directly in the face. As a result, Kyoko was delighted and, as a sign of gratitude, gently stroked Ito's hair. That night, Tetsuo visited Mitsuhashi's house, wanting to speak with him. However, Mitsuhashi refused to leave his room. When his parents inquired about Tetsuo's visit, he explained that Riko had been beaten up by someone. Upon hearing this, Mitsuhashi's parents became hysterical, immediately assuming that their son was responsible for attacking Riko. Strangely enough, Tetsuo, caught up in the moment, also became hysterical. However, he quickly regained his composure and urged everyone to calm down before recounting the events in full. He clarified that Riko had been assaulted by someone wielding a baseball bat and that Mitsuhashi was not the perpetrator. Despite this, Tetsuo was furious that Mitsuhashi had done nothing to help Riko. Meanwhile, inside his room, Mitsuhashi was visibly worried about Riko. The next day, Mitsuhashi did not attend school. While Mr. Mukinoki was teaching, Mr. Mizutani arrived and called him to the rooftop. There, several students had already been beaten up by the Helmet Boy. Shortly after, Riko and Ito also arrived. Mr. Mukinoki then handed Riko a challenge letter from the Helmet Boy. Knowing that the Helmet Boy was searching for her, Riko decided to face him alone. Upon reaching the designated location, Riko encountered the Helmet Boy. They engaged in a duel, and this time, Riko was determined to fight seriously. She managed to defeat the Helmet Boy, but he resorted to cheating by using a knife. Having already used a bat and a helmet, he now brandished a knife to fight a woman. Riko struggled against this unexpected move, but fortunately, Mitsuhashi arrived just in time to help. Using his quick thinking, Mitsuhashi struck the helmet boy's helmet with a metal rod. Once the helmet boy fell, Mitsuhashi poured chili powder inside his helmet and sealed it shut with duct tape. Afterward, Mitsuhashi invited Riko to leave with him. Once they were gone, Ito and Mr. Mukanoki arrived. Since the helmet boy had attacked a teacher, Mr. Mukanoki decided to expel him from Nyo High School. The following day, Mitsuhashi saw Imai and Yasuo, both severely beaten. Imai explained that a new student wearing a helmet had enrolled in their school and caused trouble. The helmet boy had started a commotion there as well. However, after assaulting a teacher, he was also expelled from Imai's school. Eventually, the helmet boy transferred to Geisha High School, notorious for its delinquents. There, he challenged Satoshi, but Satoshi effortlessly defeated him. Later that afternoon, on the rooftop of Geisha High, Sagara urged his friends to attack Neo High. However, his friends hesitated, stating that Satoshi had forbidden it. If Geisha High clashed with Neo High, the police would intervene. Ignoring their concerns, Sagara insisted on attacking Neo High regardless. Shortly after, Sagara confronted Satoshi in anger. He was frustrated that Satoshi refused to fight Neo High. Determined to eliminate Mitsuhashi and Ito, Sagara continued to rant, provoking Satoshi. To justify his rage, Sagara presented one of their beaten friends, claiming that he had been attacked by Neo High students led by Ito. Enraged by this revelation, Satoshi decided to confront Ito. Once Satoshi left, Sagara threatened his friend, warning him not to reveal the truth. In reality, Sagara had fabricated the entire story to manipulate Satoshi into fighting against Neo High. Elsewhere, Ito, Mitsuhashi, and Riko were on their way home. At one moment, Ito excused himself, saying he had a date with Kyoko at a cafe. However, as he walked, Ito was suddenly blocked by Satoshi and his subordinates. At that moment, Ito questioned why Satoshi had brought so many people, but instead of answering, Satoshi ordered his men to attack Ito. Overwhelmed, Ito struggled to defend himself until Satoshi commanded his subordinates to stop. He then proposed a game to Ito, a blindfolded fight. Satoshi pulled out a pair of brass knuckles and handed one to Ito, who accepted the challenge by putting them on. Ito covered his eyes and began throwing punches aimlessly, even hitting a wall by accident. He attempted to remain calm and sense Satoshi's presence, but just as he was about to land a hit, Satoshi effortlessly dodged. It was then revealed that Satoshi had never closed his eyes. Still blinded, Ito continued to swing wildly. Watching him struggle, Satoshi recalled his past defeat at the hands of Geisha High's former leader in this very game. Since then, Satoshi had believed that victory was all that mattered, regardless of the method used. With that in mind, he struck Ito and urged him to surrender. However, Ito refused to give up. Rising once more, he finally landed a punch on Satoshi. Grabbing onto Satoshi, Ito continued his assault until Satoshi halted him and instructed him to open his eyes. Seeing Ito's determination, Satoshi had a change of heart and decided to fight him fairly. Thus, a true duel between two warriors began. Both fighters were evenly matched, but in the end, Satoshi admitted defeat. Just then, Sagara arrived and ordered his men to attack Ito, accusing him of ambushing Geisha High students. However, Satoshi intervened, declaring his belief that Ito was not responsible. Enraged, Sagara provoked the others by claiming that Satoshi trusted an outsider more than his own friends. Frustrated by Sagara's manipulative behavior, Satoshi relinquished his position as leader and issued his final command to let Ito go. But Sagara ignored him. Now the new leader of Geisha High, Sagara instead ordered his subordinates to attack both Satoshi and Ito. He then struck Satoshi with a wooden stick, knocking him unconscious. Later, when Satoshi regained consciousness, he bid farewell to Ito. The scene then shifted to the classroom, where Sagawa offered his lunch to Mitsuhashi. Seeing this, Riko warned Sagawa not to give away his meal so easily. However, Sagawa insisted that he was happy to share with a friend. He also revealed that he had prepared the lunch himself. Upon hearing this, Mitsuhashi immediately refused to eat it. Moments later, they noticed Ito arriving, bruised and battered. Concerned, they took him to the school rooftop and asked what had happened. Ito explained that he had been beaten up by Geisha High students and that Sagura was now their leader. Fueled by anger, Ito was determined to take revenge, preparing to head to Geisha High. But before he could leave, Mitsuhashi encouraged him by pointing out that the Geisha High students had already arrived at Neo High. They stood outside, shouting for Mitsuhashi and Ito to come down. At that moment, Ito urged Mitsuhashi to face them together, but instead, Mitsuhashi donned his battle gear and dramatically declared that he was not Mitsuhashi. Seeing the commotion, the teachers rushed to the scene. Mrs. Yamaguchi insisted on calling the police, but Mr. Mizutani quickly stopped her. He explained that if Nayo High School got involved with the police, the number of students enrolling would drop, and the school might even face closure. Mr. Mukanoki, believing this issue needed to be resolved internally, told Ito to handle it himself. Ito then stepped forward to confront the Geisha High students, with Riko standing by his side. She threatened to call the police if they didn't back down. Just then, Sagura appeared, having already anticipated this move. He knew that if Neo High was linked to a police incident, it would damage the school's reputation. At that moment, Sagura announced that he had come to collect a debt of 3 million yen. He demanded that all Neo High students contribute to paying it, warning that if they refused, Geisha High students would ambush them every day after school. Moments later, one of the Geisha High students attempted to strike Riko, but Mitsuhashi arrived just in time. He swiftly took down the attacker and urged Ito and Riko to escape with him. After managing to get away, they decided to hide. However, Geisha High students were searching for them everywhere. Even when Mitsuhashi and Ito tried to take refuge in Mitsuhashi's own house, they found Geisha High students already there. When Mitsuhashi prepared to fight, one of the intruders pulled out a knife. Before things could escalate further, Ichiro appeared. Mistaking the intruders for Mitsuhashi's friends, he cheerfully invited them inside for some onigiri. However, Mitsuhashi's mother interrupted, saying they had no onigiri, just plain rice. This led to an argument between Mitsuhashi's parents. Witnessing the intense family quarrel, the Geisha High students became uneasy and decided to leave, dragging Mitsuhashi and Ito along with them. Shortly after, the captors took them to an abandoned building, keeping them at knife point. But Mitsuhashi managed to snatch the knife away and hurled it toward the Geisha High students, momentarily startling them. However, realizing they still had the advantage in numbers, they charged at Mitsuhashi and Ito. Fortunately, the duo cleverly used fireworks to obscure their enemy's vision and made a daring escape. When they finally returned to Neo High, they were met with cheers from their classmates, who celebrated their successful evasion. Shortly after, Kyoko, Akemi, and their friends arrived, demanding an explanation. They accused Mitsuhashi and Ito of being responsible for an attack on their friend and stealing their money. They claimed that the culprit acted under orders from Mitsuhashi and Ito. Confused and caught off guard, the two denied any involvement. Later, as they walked home, Mitsuhashi and Ito noticed the townspeople glaring at them with disapproving stares. Some even avoided them altogether. At one moment, an angry resident confronted them, accusing them of extorting money from the townspeople. Realizing they had been framed, Mitsuhashi and Ito immediately suspected Sagura. Soon after, a police patrol arrived and arrested Mitsuhashi and Ito. That evening, as Riko and her father were walking, they were confronted by a pair of thugs impersonating Mitsuhashi and Ito in an attempt to extort money. However, Riko swiftly overpowered them and took them to the police station, where Mitsuhashi and Ito were also being held. With the true culprits apprehended, the police released Mitsuhashi and Ito, clearing their names. The next day, Mitsuhashi and his friends discussed Sagura's cunning tactics against their school. Mitsuhashi realized that Sagura's true goal was to lure him and Ito into his trap. By drawing them into Geisha High School, Sagura ensured that even the police wouldn't be able to help them. Outside the classroom, Mitsuhashi encountered Sagura, who had collected money from his classmates to pay off Geisha High School. Seeing this, Mitsuhashi and Ito scolded him, telling him that there was no need to go through with it. Mitsuhashi insisted that he and Ito would handle the situation themselves. However, Sagawa grew frustrated and angrily declared that Mitsuhashi and Ito were the only hope for Nayo High School. Later, Mitsuhashi and Ito sought out Imai and Yasuo to ask for their help in storming Geisha High School. Initially, Imai refused, still upset with Mitsuhashi. But Mitsuhashi, ever the smooth talker, flattered Imai by calling him handsome, successfully convincing him to join their cause. Meanwhile, Sagawa went ahead and delivered the collected money himself. Despite this, he was mercilessly beaten by Sagara and his gang. Soon after, Mitsuhashi and his friends arrived at Geisha High School, only to find Sagawa lying bruised and battered at the gate. Enraged by the sight of their injured friend, they stormed into the school. Mitsuhashi devised a plan. He would attack Sagara from behind while the others engaged in a frontal assault. Yasuo initially objected, annoyed that Mitsuhashi was avoiding the main fight and forbidding Imai from assisting him. But once again, Mitsuhashi cunningly manipulated Imai by hyping him up, making him eager to fight. As they entered the school, they were met by a horde of Geisha High students prepared for battle. And so, the brawl began. Outnumbered, Mitsuhashi and his friends struggled, and Ito started to doubt whether they could even reach Sagara. Just when things seemed dire, Riko arrived with a group of Neo High students to back them up, evening the odds. As the fight raged on, a group of Geisha High students suddenly appeared, dragging Mitsuhashi, who was covered in blood. They presented him before Sagara, who smugly asked who had managed to defeat Mitsuhashi. But before he could finish his gloating, Mitsuhashi suddenly sprang to life and delivered a devastating uppercut to Sagara. With just a single punch, Mitsuhashi knocked Sagara out cold. It turned out that Mitsuhashi had cleverly faked his injuries. The blood on his head was nothing more than ketchup. With the defeat of Geisha High's leader, the morale of its students crumbled. Seizing the opportunity, Mitsuhashi demanded the return of the extorted money collected from Neo High students. With this, Neo High had successfully triumphed over Geisha High. They returned home victorious, celebrating their success and taking down Sagara. Mitsuhashi proudly declared himself the strongest man in Chiba. A week had passed since their battle against Geisha High. Mitsuhashi and Ito were enjoying a rare period of peace. Ever since that incident, they had not encountered any trouble. However, their tranquility was abruptly shattered when Riko and Yasuo rushed toward them in a panic. Yasuo delivered shocking news. Imai had been attacked by the Yakuza and was now in critical condition. Yasuo recounted what had happened. Imai had bravely fought off several Yakuza members and managed to defeat them. However, their leader soon arrived, and in a one-on-one battle, Imai was completely overpowered. The Yakuza leader had let Yasuo go, instructing him to deliver a message to Mitsuhashi and Ito. Now, Yasuo pleaded for their help in avenging Imai, and even offered them money as compensation. Ito refused the money, choosing to fight out of loyalty, but Mitsuhashi, unsurprisingly, accepted it with delight. Determined to see Imai, Mitsuhashi, Ito, and Riko made their way to the hospital. On the way, Mitsuhashi used the money he had just received to buy a melon as a gift. Upon arriving, a nurse informed them that Imai was in critical condition and not allowed visitors. Undeterred, they found a way to view his hospital room from the rooftop window. The sight of their injured friend, lying motionless in his hospital bed, only fueled their anger. That night, on his way home, Ito was ambushed by a group of Yakuza members, leading to an intense battle in an abandoned building. Despite the odds, Ito managed to defeat them. However, before he could escape, Tsujikawa, the Yakuza leader, appeared, accompanied by none other than Sagara. At that moment, Sagara revealed that after his humiliating defeat at the hands of Mitsuhashi, he had lost his position as Geisha High's leader and had since joined the Yakuza. Tsujikawa then explained his grudge against Mitsuhashi and Ito. In the past, they had discarded his drugs, costing him millions of yen. Back then, Mitsuhashi and Ito had used fake names, calling themselves Ikabashi and Yoshimura, which made it nearly impossible for the Yakuza to track them down. But now, thanks to Sagara, their true identities had been exposed. Enraged by his financial losses, Sujikawa viciously attacked Ito. Using only his left hand, he easily overpowered him. However, Ito, refusing to go down without a fight, mustered his strength and landed a solid punch on Sujikawa, drawing blood. This only infuriated the Yakuza boss further, and he retaliated with devastating blows, leaving Ito severely beaten. Just as Sujikawa was about to finish him off, the distant sound of police sirens filled the air. Sagara, sensing trouble, urged Sujikawa to retreat, and together, they disappeared into the night. After the incident, Mitsuhashi visited Ito in the hospital. At that moment, Ito informed him that Sagara had now joined the Yakuza and that their leader was a man named Sujikawa. As a result, he warned Mitsuhashi that Sujikawa was incredibly powerful. The next day, Mitsuhashi was escorted home from school by the teachers, who feared that the Yakuza might ambush him. Feeling uncomfortable being followed, Mitsuhashi remarked that if the Yakuza did show up, the teachers would likely be too scared to do anything. That night, Mitsuhashi secretly observed the Yakuza hideout using binoculars. Once the gang members had left, he sneaked inside, bringing a katana with him. Inside the hideout, he cleverly disabled their weapons by sealing them with superglue. When opened a drawer, Mitsuhashi found a firearm and immediately glued it shut to prevent access. However, before he could do more, the Yakuza members returned and caught him in the act. Mitsuhashi then drew his katana, ready to fight. The Yakuza members initially panicked, thinking they were about to be cut down, but soon realized that Mitsuhashi's katana was merely a toy. Despite this, he managed to defeat them all effortlessly. Shortly after, Sujikawa arrived and, instead of attacking, offered Mitsuhashi a chance to walk away unharmed. However, Mitsuhashi refused, stating that he had come to avenge his injured friends. As he prepared to strike Sujikawa, the Yakuza members drew their guns and aimed them at him. Faced with a life-threatening situation, Mitsuhashi was overcome with fear. Sujikawa warned him not to interfere with the Yakuza again. The next day, Ito returned to school despite his broken bones. Soon after, Mitsuhashi also arrived, but looking completely different. Sagawa and Ito were shocked to see him dressed like a studious, ordinary student. Mitsuhashi explained that from now on, he was giving up his delinquent ways and would focus on his studies. Hearing this, Sagawa was deeply saddened, believing that Mitsuhashi had lost his fighting spirit. Ito pulled Mitsuhashi aside to talk privately on the rooftop. There, Mitsuhashi admitted that he no longer wanted to get involved with the Yakuza. Disappointed, Ito accused him of abandoning their injured friends and declared that he would no longer consider Mitsuhashi his friend. Later in class, Mitsuhashi seemed unusually diligent, even managing to answer Mr. Mukinoki's questions, though every answer was completely wrong. After school, Ito visited Imai in the hospital. Imai had regained consciousness and immediately expressed his desire to take revenge on the Yakuza once he recovered. Before long, Sagara arrived. He had come to inform Imai that Mitsuhashi had lost his fighting spirit. Sagara boasted that since the person who had once defeated him was no longer a delinquent, he had reclaimed his position as the strongest at Geisha High School. With that, Sagara immediately left. That night, Mitsuhashi visited Riko's house and asked Tetsuo for permission to propose to Riko. Even though Mitsuhashi was no longer a delinquent, Tetsuo remained as strict as ever and ended up slapping Mitsuhashi. Later at home, Mitsuhashi's parents were shocked to see their son with black-dyed hair, diligently studying for the first time. However, despite his efforts, all his math answers were still incorrect. The next day, an unknown figure began attacking Yakuza members one by one, stealing their guns in the process. Sujikawa, the Yakuza leader, was furious and ordered his men to find the culprit immediately. Soon after, he received a phone call from the head of a neighboring city's Yakuza, who was enraged that Sujikawa had been dealing drugs in his territory. Hearing this, Sujikawa's men grew uneasy, fearing retaliation from the other Yakuza group. They suspected that the mysterious attacker might be one of their rivals. Later that night, as some of Sujikawa's men were heading home, they too were ambushed by the same unknown figure. The following day, Ito had finally recovered. That night, seeking revenge, he headed to the Yakuza hideout. At the same time, Mitsuhashi arrived and dramatically removed his disguise, a wig he had been wearing. Seeing this, Ito was relieved and overjoyed to realize that Mitsuhashi had never actually given up his delinquent nature. Inside the hideout, Tsujikawa was furious, dealing with the aftermath of his men being attacked and their weapons stolen. Just as he was venting his frustration, Mitsuhashi and Ito walked in, dressed sharply and exuding confidence. Mitsuhashi revealed that he was the one who had taken down Tsujikawa's men and stolen their guns. He had only been pretending to be a studious, timid student to avoid suspicion. Mitsuhashi then boldly declared that he would fight Tsujikawa using only his left hand, though this was, of course, just another one of his tricks. Using both hands, Mitsuhashi quickly overpowered Tsujikawa, who, in his rage, lost his composure and attacked wildly. Taking advantage of this, Mitsuhashi easily defeated him. Desperate, Tsujikawa pulled out a gun, but Mitsuhashi immediately doused him with gasoline. Now, Tsujikawa was too afraid to fire, knowing that any spark could set him ablaze. Left with no choice, he discarded his weapon. Mitsuhashi then announced that he would turn the confiscated guns over to the police as evidence, ensuring that the Yakuza would be arrested. Before leaving, he warned Tsujikawa to never mess with Nayo High School again. Humiliated, Tsujikawa was left devastated at being defeated by a mere high school student. Not long after, Sagara arrived, thanking Tsujikawa for helping him reclaim his position as the leader of Geisha High. However, Sagara no longer had any use for Tsujikawa, so he set him on fire, eliminating him once and for all. The next morning, as Mitsuhashi and Ito were heading to school, they were approached by Akemi. She informed Ito that Kyoko had been kidnapped by Sagara, who had left a note demanding that Ito come alone to rescue her. Meanwhile, at school, Mitsuhashi found Sagawa battered and bruised. Sagawa told him that the students of Geisha High had abducted Riko. He had tried to intervene, but was overpowered and beaten. Elsewhere, Ito was being beaten by the Geisha students. They held Kyoko hostage, preventing Ito from fighting back. Sagara left the task of beating Ito to his subordinates while he moved to the next room to confront Riko. Moments later, Sagara entered the room where Riko was being held, dragging along Mitsuhashi, who was already battered and bruised. Mitsuhashi did not resist, as Sagara was using Riko as leverage. He then handcuffed Mitsuhashi and proceeded to beat him mercilessly. Holding a heated iron rod, Sagara approached Riko, intending to burn her face. Just as he was about to press the rod against her skin, Mitsuhashi broke free from the handcuffs by forcing his hands through them until they bled. With sheer determination, he shielded Riko, standing bravely in her defense. Taking advantage of the moment, Sagara struck Mitsuhashi with the iron rod. Riko was devastated, watching Mitsuhashi endure the pain, but he reassured her, saying that Ito would come to their aid. True to his words, Ito arrived and landed a powerful kick on Sagara. Shocked, Sagara questioned how Ito had managed to defeat his subordinates. Ito revealed that Satoshi had intervened, angered by the Geisha students' cowardice in using a woman as a hostage. Satoshi had taught them a painful lesson. Realizing Ito had an injured arm, Sagara believed he still had the upper hand. However, Ito used his head, literally delivering a crushing blow that ultimately defeated Sagara. Moments later, the three of them, Mitsuhashi, Ito, and Riko, escaped the building, where they reunited with Kyoko, who was now safe. Seeing Ito in pain, Kyoko gently stroked his spiky hair, playfully saying it would help ease his suffering. Shortly after, Imai and Yasuo arrived, eager to assist, only to realize the fight was already over. As a result, Mitsuhashi told Imai to return to the hospital and rest. Elsewhere, Satoshi finally found Sagara. However, instead of punishing him further, he forgave Sagara and invited him to leave Geisha High behind and start a new life working outside Chiba. The next day at school, Mitsuhashi and Ito found themselves bored. With Satoshi and Sagara gone, they no longer had any opponents to fight, and no other schools dared to challenge them. However, their boredom was short-lived when Riko ran up to them, announcing that Nayo High had been attacked by Geisha High. Excited by the prospect of a new battle, They rushed outside, where they were met by Geisha High's new leader, Katori. Seeing a formidable new rival standing before them, Mitsuhashi and Ito grinned in excitement. Finally, their boredom had come to an end. And with that, the story concludes. Moral lesson from the story: if you fight too much, you might become the strongest, but also the most wanted by the police. So maybe try studying instead, even if you get all the answers wrong. Also, never trust a friend who brings duct tape to a duel. They're either too prepared or just really into arts and crafts.